Amara Johnson stood at the back of the courtroom, her hand slightly trembling as the door creaked closed behind her. The weight of the moment pressed down on her. She had never been in trouble with the law before, not in her small hometown, nor in any of the cities where her work had taken her. Yet here she was, the center of attention in a court that seemed more interested in her race than her mission. The judge, Michael Carter, an older man with sharp eyes and a reputation for being tough, glanced over at her. He didn't look particularly interested in the case. His face was more or less expressionless, but there was something in his posture, the way he set his jaw, that suggested this wasn't just another simple zoning issue. "Ms. Johnson," Judge Carter said, his voice deep with an air of finality, "you stand accused of violating zoning codes in a district where you are attempting to implement what the report describes as a digital modernization initiative. Care to explain?" Amara had rehearsed her words in the car on the way here. She had prepared for everything, except this moment. How did you explain a nationwide project to someone who barely understood its scope, let alone its importance? The judge's brow furrowed, waiting for an answer. Amara straightened her back, taking a deep breath. "Your Honor," she began, speaking clearly and deliberately, "I'm not violating any zoning laws intentionally. The zoning codes were outdated, and I was seeking permission to implement a temporary office structure as part of a federal project aimed at modernizing how aid is distributed to rural areas. This is a government-approved initiative designed to make aid distribution more efficient and transparent." She paused, gauging his reaction. He didn't interrupt, but there was no indication that he understood or even cared much for the details. Amara could tell that the judge wasn't interested in hearing about her project's benefits, its potential to change the lives of people in underserved areas. The law was simple, and it needed to be upheld. No exceptions, no room for nuance. At least, that's how it seemed to him. Judge Carter flipped through a few papers on his desk, scanning the printed reports about her project, likely not understanding half of what he was reading. Then he raised an eyebrow. "I've heard about these so-called modernization efforts," he said slowly, his voice tinged with skepticism. "But I don't see how that justifies setting up a temporary office in a residential area without following proper procedures. How can I be sure this isn't some elaborate scheme to bypass regulations?" A ripple of unease swept through the room. Amara clenched her jaw, but forced herself to stay composed. She had prepared for questions, but this felt different. His tone wasn't just dismissive, it was accusatory. There was a kind of undercurrent in his words, as if he saw her project as little more than a loophole to exploit rather than a legitimate effort to help. "Your Honor," she replied, her voice steady, "I'm not asking for a loophole. I'm trying to make a real difference. The people in rural areas are being left behind by the current system. This project is about bringing them access to the same opportunities that more urban areas already have. By modernizing the way federal aid is distributed, we can ensure that those who need it most receive it in a timely, transparent, and efficient manner." Judge Carter didn't seem moved. He shuffled the papers before him again, his fingers tapping lightly against the desk. Amara's heart beat faster. She knew that the systems she was trying to change were not just slow, they were entrenched in outdated thinking. She could see it in the judge's eyes. It wasn't that he didn't care about progress. It was that he couldn't see beyond the framework that had always existed. Without much more deliberation, Judge Carter looked up at her. "I'm afraid I'll have to fine you for the zoning violation. It's clear you've overstepped the boundaries here. Consider this a warning." He paused, his voice flat. $500, payable within 30 days. The words hit her like a punch. She had expected a fine, but not this. This wasn't just about the money. It was about the principle. The judge hadn't even tried to understand her work or its potential. It felt like a slap in the face, a reminder that some people couldn't see beyond their own limited views. Amara stood still, fighting back the wave of frustration that threatened to swallow her. She glanced at the people in the courtroom. Most of them were just spectators, waiting for their own cases to be heard. None of them seemed to care about her mission. They were more interested in how fast the judge would rule and whether or not they'd be sent home quickly. Her stomach churned as she left the courtroom, the weight of the fine and the judge's dismissive attitude lingering in the air. But she wouldn't let it stop her. This was just a setback, nothing more. She was here to fight for something bigger, something that mattered. And if the judge couldn't see it, then she would find others who would. Amara Johnson's roots stretched deep into the heart of a small rural town, a place where life was slow, and the days seemed to pass by like the slow-moving river that ran through it. Raised in a modest home by a hard-working single mother, Amara learned early on the value of perseverance and the weight of opportunity lost. Her mother, a school teacher, instilled in her the belief that education was the key to unlocking a better future, both for herself and for those she sought to serve. Amara's childhood wasn't easy, but it shaped her. As a young girl, she saw firsthand how many of her neighbors struggled to access basic resources. Medical care, quality education, financial support. These things felt out of reach for the families in her town. Her mother would often talk about the unfairness of it all, the way federal assistance never seemed to arrive in a timely manner, and how much of it was mired in red tape. Why should we have to fight so hard just to get what we're owed? Her mother would often ask, the frustration clear in her voice. There's a better way to do this. We just need someone to fight for it. It was those conversations that stayed with Amara as she grew older. When she left for college on a scholarship, she felt an intense drive to pursue a degree in public policy. The more she learned about government systems and the challenges facing rural America, the more determined she became. She realized that there was an opportunity to modernize the very systems her mother had complained about for years. If she could get involved in shaping policy, she could make the process of receiving aid simpler, more accessible, and fairer for communities like hers. Her path led her to a position with a federal agency that focused on streamlining the distribution of federal aid to underserved regions. At first, it was a job like any other: office hours, meetings, paperwork. But over time, Amara began to think bigger. She started proposing ways to modernize the system, suggesting digital solutions like blockchain and data transparency to replace outdated methods that often led to delays, corruption, and confusion. She soon found herself heading up a project that would change everything, a nationwide initiative to bring modern technology to rural aid systems. The project aimed to create a digital infrastructure that would ensure aid was distributed more efficiently, directly reaching those who needed it most. It was a massive undertaking, and though it was initially met with resistance, Amara pushed forward with unwavering commitment. But it wasn't just about technology for Amara. It was about people, the families who had struggled, the communities that had been ignored, and the individuals who had watched as others received help while they were left to fend for themselves. She had seen that in her own town, in the faces of her neighbors who worked hard every day, but could never quite get ahead. She knew that by making this system more transparent and efficient, she could help those people achieve the life they deserved. Her vision wasn't just to install new systems. It was to create an ecosystem of support where technology could empower those who had been marginalized for so long. She worked tirelessly, traveling to rural towns, speaking to residents, learning about their struggles. In every conversation, her purpose became clearer. This project was about more than just improving systems. It was about rebuilding trust. Yet, even with all of her efforts, Amara's work was often misunderstood. She found herself constantly having to explain to others what blockchain was and why it was crucial for improving transparency. She encountered skepticism at every turn. Some believed it was too radical. Others didn't see why it was necessary. But Amara knew that change never came easily. She was used to pushing boundaries, questioning the status quo, and fighting for what she believed was right. As her project expanded and began to gain traction, Amara's name started to appear in local and national news. She was interviewed about her efforts, hailed as a trailblazer, a modern-day pioneer for rural America. But even as the media celebrated her, the people who had known her as a child, The ones who watched her grow up didn't always understand the complexity of her work. To them, Amara was just a local girl, now grown up, trying to fix something that didn't seem broken in the first place. When the zoning issue came up, Amara had hoped it would be a small hurdle in the grand scheme of her project. But the fine, imposed so swiftly by Judge Carter, felt like more than just an inconvenience. It was a symbol of the misunderstanding she had faced her entire life. It was as if her efforts to bring change to a system that had long been broken were being dismissed by those who didn't understand why it mattered. Amara left the courthouse that day feeling defeated, but her resolve only hardened. She was used to being underestimated. She had always been the one to challenge expectations, to prove people wrong. This was no different. If anything, it was a sign that her work was touching on something important, something that needed to change. She wasn't about to let one fine stop her, not when there was so much at stake. As she walked away from the courthouse, Amara looked toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light over the town she had always known. It was time to bring that light to the places that had been left in the dark for too long. And she would fight for it, no matter the cost. The news about Amara's find spread quickly through the small town, but not in the way she had hoped. Some viewed it as a mere misunderstanding, a legal technicality. Others, especially those who had no clear understanding of what Amara's project entailed, saw it as yet another example of someone rocking the boat without fully grasping the implications. Among them, the local reporter, Samantha Clark, was the only one who seemed determined to dig deeper into the story. Samantha was a seasoned journalist, known for her keen eye for detail and her tenacity in uncovering the truth. When she first heard about the fine, she thought little of it, but something in Amara's name sparked her curiosity. She'd seen the woman speak at a town meeting months earlier, where she had presented her ambitious project to revamp how federal aid reached rural communities. At the time, Samantha hadn't given it much thought. She was focused on other stories, the ones that seemed to matter more immediately. But now something about the fine seemed off. The story wasn't adding up. She decided to dig into Amara's background, tracing the origins of her project. What she found was nothing short of extraordinary. Amara was not just a government worker. She was leading an innovative initiative designed to transform the way federal aid was distributed across the country. Using cutting-edge technologies, such as blockchain, Amara was creating a system that could eliminate much of the inefficiency, corruption, and delay that often plagued the process. Her mission wasn't just about streamlining bureaucracy. It was about ensuring that rural communities, often left behind by urban-centered policies, could access resources more quickly and fairly. As Samantha delved deeper, she learned about the complexity and scale of the project. Amara's system would allow for real-time tracking of aid funds, ensuring that every dollar could be traced to its recipient, providing a level of transparency and accountability that was unprecedented. It could reduce fraud, speed up disbursement times, and ultimately allow communities to access the support they needed when they needed it most. In a world where rural America often felt forgotten, Amara's project was a lifeline. But as Samantha read through the details, one thing became glaringly obvious. Amara's work wasn't just about technology. It was about people, about empowering individuals who had been systematically overlooked. And yet, here was this fine, seemingly based on a misunderstanding of the very project that could change the lives of thousands. The more Samantha learned, the more she realized how little the judge, and by extension, the court, understood about Amara's vision. The fine wasn't just a bureaucratic glitch. It was a symbol of how easily innovation could be dismissed when it came from someone outside the traditional power structures. The way the local government and institutions operated was built on outdated practices that didn't align with the rapidly changing world, and Amara was pushing them to confront that reality. Samantha knew this was a story worth telling, one that went far beyond a minor legal dispute. It was a tale of a woman fighting to bring change to a broken system, only to be met with skepticism and opposition at every turn. She picked up the phone and reached out to Amara for an interview. The two arranged to meet at a small cafe the following day. When Amara arrived, her face was more composed than Samantha expected. She had a calm, confident air about her, as though she were used to fighting battles that no one else could see. Over coffee, Samantha listened as Amara spoke about her project, explaining the intricacies of how blockchain could revolutionize government aid distribution. Her eyes lit up when she talked about the potential for transparency and efficiency, how rural communities, once left to navigate a cumbersome system, would now have a fighting chance to thrive. As Amara spoke, Samantha's skepticism melted away. She had been expecting the typical rhetoric about progress, but what Amara was saying was different. This wasn't a pitch for a product or a political agenda. It was a mission, one born out of personal experience and a desire to make a tangible difference. I don't think most people understand how difficult it is to get aid when you live in a small town like mine, Amara explained, her voice tinged with quiet conviction. You can fill out all the forms, jump through all the hoops, and still have to wait months, sometimes years, for help. And when it does come, it's often not enough, or it's gone before it can really make a difference. The system is broken, and I'm here to fix it. Samantha took detailed notes, her mind racing with the implications of what Amara was saying. She could see now why the fine had been so hard for Amara to swallow. It wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was a setback, a reminder of how far the world still had to go before it could catch up with the needs of its people. Before they parted ways, Samantha made a promise to herself. She would write this story, not just for the local town, but for the world. The public needed to know what Amara was trying to accomplish, and how the system, the very institutions meant to help people, were standing in the way. This wasn't just about a fine. It was about a battle for progress, for fairness, for justice. As Samantha returned to her office and began drafting the article, she felt a growing sense of urgency. This wasn't just another news piece. It was a call to action. She knew the town wouldn't be the same after people learned the truth about Amara's project. And if the judge didn't understand it yet, he would soon. Because the world was changing, and those who refused to see it would be left behind. Judge Michael Carter sat alone in his chambers, his hands folded on the desk in front of him. The faint hum of the courthouse's air conditioning was the only sound breaking the silence, but it did little to ease the growing unease in his mind. He had ruled in what he believed was the best interest of the community. It had always been his principle to uphold the law strictly, without deviation, to maintain order. But now, with the weight of the fine he had imposed on Amara Johnson settling heavily on him, he couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't sit right. The article Samantha Clark had written about Amara's project lay open in front of him. He had read it several times over the past few days, unable to get past the details that now seemed to haunt him. Her work wasn't some passing fancy or a misguided attempt to game the system, as he had initially assumed. No, Amara's project was about real change, real improvement. She was trying to help the people he had spent his entire life serving, yet his knee-jerk reaction had been to fine her for something that seemed trivial in the grand scheme of things, a minor zoning violation. He picked up the paper again, scanning the words, his fingers lingering on the parts that described how blockchain technology could revolutionize federal aid systems, making them transparent, fast, and reliable. How it could lift rural communities out of poverty by ensuring that the help they received was timely and well-targeted. The more he read, the more he realized that the system Amara was building was exactly the kind of progressive change that was needed. And yet, in his courtroom, he had treated her like an outsider, someone trying to break the rules. As he thought about it more, Judge Carter began to feel a sense of regret. His decision had been rushed. He had acted out of habit, relying on what he knew best, the old, familiar ways of doing things. It was how he had been taught to approach his work for decades. But in this case, it wasn't enough. Amara wasn't just some woman from the city trying to sidestep the law. She was someone with a vision to help a group of people who had long been ignored by the system. And his ruling, one he had thought was minor, had the potential to set her back. He ran his hand over his face, his mind racing with the implications of what he had done. It wasn't like him to be unsure, But now, he couldn't shake the thought that perhaps his actions had been more about his own limited view of the world than anything else. He had judged her not on the merits of her work, but on his assumptions about who she was and what she was trying to do. The fine wasn't just about zoning. It was about the broader tension between old systems and the new ways that the world was evolving. And the more he thought about it, the clearer it became that he had chosen to stand with the old systems, even though they weren't serving the people they were meant to help. Judge Carter had been a man of principle, but his principles had been rooted in the past, not the future. His role as a judge had always been about enforcing rules, but now he had to ask himself, what if the rules weren't right anymore? What if they were keeping progress from happening? The thought struck him harder than anything he had felt in a long time. Was he the one standing in the way of progress? As the day wore on, the weight of this realization grew. He knew that it wasn't enough to simply feel regret. He needed to take action. He couldn't let the situation slide by, not when it was so clear that Amara's project had the potential to reshape lives for the better. It was time for him to correct the course, not only for Amara, but for the community he had sworn to serve. His decision, however, would not be an easy one. The town had grown accustomed to the way things were done, to a pace and a mindset that didn't always accommodate innovation. To take a stand and apologize for his earlier judgment would mean not only admitting a mistake, but also challenging the very systems that had governed his work for decades. It would be a monumental shift, and one that would be met with resistance. But Judge Carter knew deep down that if he truly wanted to serve the community in a meaningful way, he needed to support initiatives like Amara's, initiatives that sought to break free from outdated traditions and pave the way for a future that could benefit everyone. He needed to set an example, one that showed the community it was possible to embrace change without fear. It was late in the afternoon when he finally made up his mind. He would reach out to Amara. He would apologize, not only for the fine but for his own failure to see the bigger picture. He would publicly support her initiative, letting the town know that sometimes the best way forward was to embrace new ideas, even when they challenged the status quo. As Judge Carter stood up from his desk, he felt a sense of resolve settle over him. He wasn't just a judge anymore. He was a part of something bigger, something that could make a difference. The town was about to change, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was part of the solution. Amara stood in her small apartment, staring at her phone. The flashing notification on the screen caught her attention, a message from an unknown number. Hesitating for a moment, she opened it. The words on the screen were a surprise. Ms. Johnson, I regret to inform you that I made an error in my judgment regarding the fine. I would like to meet with you to discuss a potential resolution. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Judge Michael Carter. The message was brief, but its impact was immediate. Amara's heart raced. She hadn't expected this. After everything, being dismissed in court, the fine, it had felt like a battle she was fighting alone. Yet here was an acknowledgement that perhaps she hadn't been wrong in her pursuit after all. The judge, of all people, was reaching out to her. At first, she wasn't sure what to make of it. Was this some sort of formality, or was it a genuine attempt to make amends? Either way, it felt like a step towards something bigger. Amara knew that she had to be cautious. She'd spent so much of her life fighting for respect, for recognition, and she wasn't about to let herself be placated by a simple apology. But there was also a part of her that wanted to believe this could be the beginning of a real change. She replied, setting a time to meet the next morning at the courthouse. After sending the message, she put the phone down, her thoughts swirling. It wasn't just about the fine. It was about the future of her project, the people who were depending on her work, and the systemic change she was trying to bring to life. A part of her wondered if Judge Carter had truly understood what she was trying to do, or if he had simply realized that the project was too important to ignore. Either way, she was going to hear him out. The next day, she walked into the courthouse with a steady, purposeful stride. It was early, and the air felt crisp as she made her way through the familiar halls. The same courthouse where just days ago she had felt like an outsider was now the place where she was about to have a conversation that could change everything. When she entered the judge's chambers, he was waiting for her. His usually stern expression was softer now, and there was an air of humility in his posture. He rose as she entered, extending a hand toward her. "Ms. Johnson," he began, his voice carrying a note of sincerity. "Thank you for coming. I know this meeting is long overdue, and I want to start by saying that I made a mistake, a serious one. I misjudged not only your project, but also your intentions." Amara took a deep breath, nodding slowly. She had prepared for a conversation like this, but hearing it from him still felt surreal. "Thank you, Judge Carter," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I appreciate your honesty." He gestured for her to sit, and they both took their seats. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if both were searching for the right words to bridge the gap that had formed between them in the courtroom. Judge Carter was the first to break the silence. "I've spent the last few days looking into your work," he said, his eyes meeting hers with a level of seriousness that surprised her. "I've been doing some reading, speaking to people, trying to understand more about what you're trying to achieve. And I've realized that what you're doing is not just about a minor zoning issue. It's about the future of this country, about breaking down barriers that have held too many people back for too long." Amara listened intently, a mixture of relief and cautious optimism settling in her chest. It wasn't every day that someone admitted their mistakes, especially someone as powerful as a judge. But this felt different. This wasn't just an apology. It was a recognition of something much larger. "I've always believed in following the rules," Judge Carter continued. "But sometimes the rules aren't enough. Sometimes they stand in the way of progress. I've learned it the hard way, and I want to do better. I'd like to offer you a public apology for the fine. I will also work to have the ruling overturned. And beyond that, I want to offer my support for your project. This town, and many others like it, need the changes you're advocating for." Amara felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had never wanted the fine or the confrontation. She just wanted to make a real difference. The fact that the judge was now aligning himself with her cause meant more than any apology ever could. It meant that the work she was doing could, indeed, be supported by those in power. "Thank you, Judge Carter," Amara said, her voice steady now, with a hint of warmth. "I appreciate your willingness to listen and to correct what happened. This project is about the future, and it's about making sure that those who have been left behind for so long finally have a seat at the table. Your support will make all the difference." Judge Carter nodded. "I believe that now. And I'll do everything I can to make sure this project succeeds. We need more people like you, people who are willing to challenge the status quo and push for what's right." As Amara left the courthouse that day, her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. The battle she had been fighting for so long had taken a new turn. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. There would still be challenges ahead, resistance from some quarters, skepticism from others. But now she had someone in a position of power who understood what she was doing. And with that, Amara felt more determined than ever to see her vision through. The road ahead was long, but today marked the beginning of a new chapter, and for the first time in a long while, Amara could see the path forward clearly. The next few weeks brought a whirlwind of activity. News of Judge Carter's apology and his newfound support for Amara's project spread quickly through the town. The local media covered the story extensively, framing it as a shift in attitude, a breakthrough that symbolized a broader recognition of the importance of innovation for rural communities. But while some residents celebrated the change, others remained skeptical, unsure of how much difference the project could truly make. Amara knew that now was the time to rally support. The real challenge wasn't just winning over Judge Carter. It was about convincing the people of the town that her vision could work. She decided to hold a town hall meeting to present her ideas and explain the benefits of the new aid system she was working to implement. The town hall was scheduled for a Tuesday evening, and Amara felt a mix of excitement and nervousness as she prepared for the event. She knew the turnout would be critical. This was her chance to make her case directly to the community, to show them why her project wasn't just a tech-driven initiative, but something that could transform their lives for the better. As the evening approached, she arrived early at the community center, where folding chairs were arranged in rows, and a projector screen was set up at the front. The room filled quickly with residents, their faces a mix of curiosity and caution. Amara took her place at the podium, glancing over the crowd before starting. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began, her voice clear and steady. "I know there are many questions about what I'm trying to do here, and I'm here to answer those questions, to explain why this is so important, not just for me, but for all of us." She spent the next hour explaining the intricacies of her project, how it would simplify the application process for federal aid, eliminate unnecessary delays, and ensure transparency in the distribution of resources. She walked them through the technical aspects of blockchain, breaking it down into simple terms and demonstrating how the technology could ensure that aid funds reached those who needed them most. There were moments of silence as the crowd absorbed the information, and Amara could see that some were starting to understand the potential. But there were still those who were unconvinced, whose eyes narrowed with skepticism. One elderly man stood up, his voice gruff. "How can we trust a system like this? We've been waiting for years for help, and now you want to bring in more technology. What's wrong with the way it's been done?" Amara took a deep breath, her heart pounding. "I understand your concern," she said. "Trust has to be earned. But the system we have now isn't working. It's outdated, slow, and leaves too many people without the help they need. My goal isn't to replace the system, but to improve it, to make sure that when you need help, you get it quickly, fairly, and without all the red tape." The room fell quiet, and Amara could see that the man was considering her words. It was a small victory, but it was enough to keep her going. By the end of the meeting, she had answered questions, alleviated some fears, and even received offers of help from community members who believed in her project. As Amara left the community center that night, she felt a surge of hope. It wouldn't be easy, but the seeds of change had been planted. And now, with the support of the community and Judge Carter behind her, she knew she had a real chance to make the difference she had always dreamed of. Despite the positive momentum, Amara knew that not everyone was on board with her project. Change, especially in small communities, often came with resistance, and while the town hall had garnered support from some residents, others were still deeply skeptical. The old guard, those who had been entrenched in the system for decades, viewed her ideas with suspicion. They saw her as an outsider with lofty ambitions, and they didn't trust that the new system could truly deliver on its promises. A few days after the town hall, Amara was contacted by a local group of influential leaders, business owners, former government officials, and even some members of the town council who were critical of her project. They requested a private meeting, and although she had expected pushback, the intensity of their opposition surprised her. When Amara entered the meeting room, the atmosphere was tense. The group, led by David Peterson, a longtime local businessman, was waiting for her. David was known for his influence in town, and his skepticism about Amara's project was no secret. He wasted no time getting to the point. "We appreciate your enthusiasm, Ms. Johnson, but we have serious concerns," David began, his voice steady but firm. "This project, this so-called modernization, isn't what this town needs. We've always worked with the systems we know. You're trying to bring in something that's untested, something that could disrupt the way things have always been done." Amara sat down, holding her ground. She had anticipated this, but she wasn't about to back down now. "I understand your concerns," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "But the system we have right now isn't working. It's inefficient and outdated. People are waiting for help, sometimes for years. It's not fair, and it's not sustainable. I'm not here to disrupt. I'm here to make things better." David shook his head. You think technology is the answer. The people here aren't interested in some high-tech solution. What they need is reliable, local leadership, not more bureaucracy and impersonal systems. Amara felt the sting of his words but remained composed. What I'm offering isn't bureaucracy. It's transparency. It's efficiency. And it's about trust. This isn't about replacing local leadership. It's about empowering people, giving them the tools to make sure their voices are heard. One of the other leaders, Helen Foster, a retired councilwoman, chimed in. You talk about blockchain and transparency, but who's going to ensure that this system works? Who's going to guarantee that it doesn't fall apart the way so many other innovations have? Amara paused, knowing the weight of her answer. No system is perfect, but this is a step in the right direction. Blockchain isn't just about technology, it's about accountability. The technology ensures that every dollar, every resource, is tracked. It's impossible to manipulate or hide funds. This project isn't about getting it right every single time. It's about reducing the waste and the inefficiencies that have plagued this town for years. The room fell silent as her words lingered in the air. Amara could see the doubt in their eyes, but she could also see a glimmer of curiosity. They weren't ready to embrace her ideas fully, but they were beginning to listen. That, she knew, was the first step. David Peterson broke the silence. I'm not convinced yet, but I'll give you this. You've got guts. I'll give you that. I think you'll find out that not everyone here is going to be as receptive as you might like. Amara stood up, feeling a sense of resolve settle over her. I know it's not going to be easy, but I'll keep pushing, and I'll keep proving that this is the right way forward. As she left the meeting, Amara felt a mixture of frustration and determination. Resistance was to be expected, but she wasn't about to let it stop her. The road ahead would be long, but she knew the importance of her mission. Change was never easy, but it was necessary. And with every step, she was closer to making a lasting difference. The weeks that followed were a test of Amara's perseverance. The initial support she'd received was crucial, but the resistance from the old guard had only intensified. The local leadership group, led by David Peterson and Helen Foster, continued to question her project at every turn, pushing back at town meetings, writing op-eds in the local paper, and even reaching out to state representatives to voice their concerns. It was clear they wouldn't give up easily. But Amara was undeterred. She knew that true change never came without opposition. She continued to meet with community members, explaining her project and answering questions, no matter how difficult. The project's success depended not only on the technology, but on earning the trust of the people who needed it most. Then, one afternoon, something unexpected happened. Amara was at the local library, reviewing some new data about federal aid programs, when she received an email from Judge Carter. It was short but to the point. Ms. Johnson, I believe it's time to take the next step. I've been in talks with the town council, and we'd like to schedule a public hearing to discuss the benefits of your project. Your ideas are gaining traction, and I'd like to offer my full support at this hearing. We need to show the town that this project has the potential to help everyone, not just the tech-savvy or the young. Amara felt a surge of relief. Judge Carter's involvement, his public backing, meant everything. The town needed to see that someone in a position of authority believed in her project, and his endorsement could sway the remaining skeptics. The day of the public hearing arrived, and the courthouse was packed. The room was filled with residents, business owners, and even some of the most vocal critics of Amara's project. Amara arrived early, her heart racing, as she took her place at the front of the room. Judge Carter was already there, seated at the bench, and he gave her a small, encouraging nod. The hearing began with Judge Carter addressing the crowd. His voice, once stern and reserved, now carried a sense of conviction. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for coming. Today, we stand at a crossroads. We can either continue down the same path with all its inefficiencies, or we can embrace a new future, one where our resources are distributed more fairly, more transparently, and more effectively. This is not just about technology. This is about progress, accountability, and most importantly, hope for our future. Amara was next. She stepped up to the microphone, looking out at the sea of faces, some hopeful, some doubtful, but all waiting to hear what she had to say. I spent my entire career fighting for change, for the people who are left behind by outdated systems, she began. This project isn't about me. It's about all of us, every single person in this room, and everyone outside of it. It's about making sure that when you need help, when your family needs help, you don't have to wait years for a broken system to come through. This is about fairness. It's about trust. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. Together, we can make this happen. Together, we can ensure that our town, our people, get the support they need, when they need it. But it starts with you. It starts with us, believing that change is possible. As she spoke, Amara saw the shift happening before her eyes. The room, once filled with tension and doubt, now seemed more open, more receptive. When she finished, there was a moment of silence before the first round of applause began. It wasn't unanimous, but it was a start. Judge Carter stood, his voice firm but warm. "I'm proud to stand behind Ms. Johnson and her project. This is the future, and it's time we embraced it. I believe in this, and I hope you do too." By the end of the hearing, Amara could feel a new energy in the air. The path ahead wasn't clear of obstacles, but with Judge Carter's backing and the growing support from the community, it felt more attainable than ever. The project was no longer just an idea. It was becoming a reality. As Amara left the courthouse that evening, the weight of the past months seemed to lift off her shoulders. She wasn't just fighting for a vision anymore. She was fighting for the town's future. And with each step forward, she knew she was closer to making that future a reality.